A tall young man walked into the airport. He was dressed neatly, his posture straight, and he moved with confidence. He wasn't causing any trouble. He wasn't loud or drawing attention to himself. Yet, something about him made people glance in his direction. Some looked once and moved on, but others took a second look. Then, the whispers started. "That's Barron Trump," someone muttered under their breath. "Is that really him?" another person asked, trying to confirm. The name alone created a buzz. Barron Trump was not just any young man. He was the son of a former president of the United States. And because of that, people had strong opinions about him, some positive, some negative. But why would that matter at an airport? He was just another passenger, traveling like everyone else. Barron calmly walked toward the check-in counter. He waited in line like everyone else. There was no special treatment, no bodyguards surrounding him. He was simply a traveler, just like the others standing nearby. But then, something strange happened. The airport staff, who had been handling other passengers normally, suddenly started acting differently. Their smiles faded, their expressions changed. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed irritated. It was almost as if they had just realized who he was and weren't happy about it. As Barron reached the counter, an airline worker hesitated before speaking. The tone was different, colder, less friendly. But he ignored it and handed over his ticket and passport, just like any other passenger. The staff member took the documents, looked at them, then looked at Barron again. There was a pause, and then the unexpected happened. "You need to leave," the staff member said firmly. For a second, Barron thought he had misheard. Leave? Why? He had done nothing wrong. He was simply there to board a flight, just like everyone else. He stayed calm and asked politely, "Is there a problem?" But the response was not polite. The staff member repeated, "You need to leave. Now." People around him started paying attention. A few gasps could be heard from the crowd. Nobody understood what was happening. Barron, still composed, tried to understand. "I have a valid ticket. I've followed all the procedures. Can you tell me why?" But the staff member didn't answer. Instead, another employee approached, this time with an even harsher tone. "We're asking you to leave the airport immediately. If you don't, we will have to take further action." Barron was stunned. He had done nothing wrong. Was this because of his last name? Was he being treated differently because of who his father was? The situation didn't make sense. By now, other passengers were watching closely. Some were confused. Others were recording on their phones. The tension was growing. Then, without warning, a security guard appeared. "We will escort you out," the guard said. At this point, it was clear that Barron wasn't welcome here. But why? What rule had he broken? What policy had he violated? He wasn't causing trouble, he wasn't acting suspiciously, and he wasn't breaking any laws. Yet, he was being treated like an unwanted guest. Reluctantly, Barron picked up his bag. He knew that arguing wouldn't change anything. As he turned to leave, he could feel the stares of dozens of people on him. Some looked sympathetic, others looked shocked. And then, just as he started walking away, something even more surprising happened. A woman's voice echoed through the terminal. "What is going on here?" Heads turned. People stepped aside. And there, walking through the airport with undeniable presence, was Melania Trump. The moment Melania Trump entered the scene, everything changed. The atmosphere in the airport shifted. The whispers grew louder. People stepped back as she moved forward with an air of confidence that could not be ignored. She wasn't just another passenger. She wasn't just another traveler. She was the former First Lady of the United States, and she was here for one reason, her son. Her heels clicked against the airport floor as she walked with purpose. Her expression was calm but serious. She had seen everything. She had heard everything. And she was not happy. Barron stood still, surprised to see his mother appear so quickly. The airport staff, who had been so firm just moments ago, now looked uncertain. Their confidence faded as they realized who they were dealing with. Melania reached Barron's side and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Then, she turned to face the staff. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharpness in it. "Can someone explain to me why my son is being removed from this airport?" she asked, looking directly at the employees who had just kicked Barron out. The workers exchanged nervous glances. A moment ago, they had been in control. Now, they weren't so sure. They had expected Barron to leave quietly. They had not expected Melania to show up. One of the employees hesitated before speaking. "Ma'am, we have rules to follow." Melania didn't blink. "What rule has he broken?" Silence. Nobody could answer. Because there was no rule. There was no valid reason. The tension grew. Other passengers were now completely focused on what was happening. Some had their phones out, recording the moment. This wasn't just an airport issue anymore. This was about to become national news. Melania took a step closer, her eyes locking onto the staff. "I will not allow my son to be treated unfairly. Either you give me a valid explanation, or you fix this mistake immediately." The staff looked at each other again. The security guard who had been ready to escort Barron out suddenly seemed unsure. They had acted quickly, perhaps too quickly, without thinking of the consequences. And now, they were face to face with a former First Lady who was demanding answers. The airport was completely silent, waiting for what would happen next. The air inside the airport terminal felt heavy. Everyone, passengers, staff, and even security, stood frozen, waiting for what would happen next. The employees who had been so firm just moments ago were now quiet. The situation had changed drastically. They had expected Barron Trump to leave without protest. What they had not expected was Melania Trump arriving like a storm, demanding answers. Melania's expression remained calm, but there was an undeniable authority in her voice. She turned to the staff and spoke again, this time slower, firmer. "I asked a question," she said, her eyes scanning the employees in front of her. "What rule did my son break?" The staff members exchanged nervous glances. They had no real answer. They had made a decision in the moment, likely based on personal opinions rather than actual policy. And now they were stuck. One of the airline employees, an older man with a badge that suggested he was a supervisor, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we, have security protocols. We have the right to refuse service to any passenger if we believe," Melania cut him off. "If you believe what?" Her voice was sharper now. "That my son is a danger? That my son is a threat?" She shook her head. "He was standing here, quietly checking in for his flight. He did nothing wrong, and yet you decided to remove him. Why?" Again, no one had an answer. Passengers nearby whispered among themselves. Some were shocked. Others were outraged. A few even took out their phones and started recording, sensing that this moment was bigger than just a minor airport dispute. The silence was unbearable. The supervisor finally let out a sigh. "Ma'am, we were just following orders." "Whose orders?" Melania asked immediately. Another pause. There was no good response. Then, in an attempt to take back control, the supervisor straightened his shoulders and said, "Ma'am, we do not have to explain our decision. If you and your son have a problem with it, you may file a complaint with the airline." A mistake. A big mistake. Melania's lips pressed together. A flicker of frustration crossed her face, but she quickly regained her composure. She took a deep breath and looked around. She saw the people watching. She saw the cameras recording. And she realized something important: this wasn't just about Barron anymore. This was about power, authority, and the way people in positions of control treated others. She was not going to let this go. Melania reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. The moment she did, the staff members' expressions shifted. There was no telling who she was calling, but they knew it couldn't be good for them. She dialed a number and waited. The tension in the air was thick. Passengers nearby leaned in, trying to listen. Then, after just one ring, someone answered. "Hello," Melania said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I need to speak to someone in charge immediately." There was a pause on the other end. Then, the person on the phone responded quickly, their tone changing the second they realized who they were speaking to. Melania didn't wait for pleasantries. "I am at the airport with my son, and he has just been unfairly removed from his flight. I need this fixed immediately." The staff members tensed. They couldn't hear the full conversation, but they could tell by her tone that things were about to change. The voice on the other end spoke fast, clearly understanding the weight of the situation. Melania nodded. "Good. I expect immediate action." She ended the call and slipped her phone back into her bag. Then, she turned to the staff. "You have made a serious mistake," she said. "And now you are going to fix it." The supervisor hesitated. "Ma'am, I don't." Before he could finish, his own phone rang. His eyes widened when he saw the caller ID. It was someone from the airline's upper management. His hands shook slightly as he answered. "Yes, sir," he said quickly, stepping away from the counter. "No, sir, yes, sir, I understand." His voice was tense, almost panicked. He glanced at Melania, then at Barron. The passengers watching the situation unfold could see what was happening. Melania had called someone high up, someone powerful, and now the staff members who had so confidently kicked Barron out were scrambling to fix their mistake. The supervisor hung up the call, his face pale. Then, he cleared his throat and turned back to Melania. "Ma'am, there has been a misunderstanding." Melania raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding?" She repeated the word slowly, letting it hang in the air. "Yes," the man nodded quickly. "Of course, your son is welcome to board his flight. There is no issue." He turned to Barron. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion." The sudden shift in tone was almost laughable. Just minutes ago, they were ready to throw Barron out of the airport. Now, they were apologizing. But Melania wasn't done yet. As Melania and Barron made their way towards security, a sense of satisfaction lingered in the air. But that satisfaction was mixed with something else, a quiet determination that the fight wasn't over yet. Melania wasn't one to let go of things easily, especially when it came to injustice. Once through security, Melania paused, taking out her phone once more. This time, it wasn't to make a call for help. This time, it was to take action. She opened an email app and started typing, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Dear Airline Management, I am writing to express my extreme disappointment in the treatment my son, Barron, received at your airport. The incident was not just a misunderstanding, as you suggested, but a clear case of discrimination. I will not rest until the full details of this matter are addressed, and I expect to be informed of the actions you plan to take to ensure that no other passenger is subjected to such unfair treatment in the future. If I do not hear from you within 24 hours, I will be forced to escalate this matter further. Regards, Melania Trump. With a few taps, the email was sent. She knew the powerful connections she had, people who could make things happen, who could hold the airline accountable. But this was more than just a business deal, it was about principle. Meanwhile, back at the airport, the staff was still reeling from the encounter. The supervisor who had spoken to Melania walked into a back office, his mind racing. He'd seen firsthand how one phone call had turned everything upside down. His superior had been very clear. This was not an isolated incident, and if Melania was serious, there would be consequences for everyone involved. He sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew that the fallout from this incident would not end today. It would echo for days, weeks, maybe even months. The next morning, an email from the airline management appeared in Melania's inbox, as she had anticipated. It was a formal apology, accompanied by a promise to investigate the matter thoroughly and take appropriate action. However, Melania wasn't satisfied with just an apology. She responded swiftly. I appreciate your apology, but words are not enough. I need to see real, tangible actions. You must ensure that those responsible for this discriminatory act are held accountable, and that future incidents like this are prevented. I expect a detailed report within the next 48 hours. She sent the email, her resolve unwavering. This was far from over. Melania was not one to sit idly by and let things slide. She had a reputation for standing up for what was right, and she would not let this injustice be swept under the rug. Back at the airport, the staff was summoned for a meeting with higher management. The tension was palpable as they sat in the conference room, waiting for the inevitable consequences of their actions. The door swung open, and the senior manager walked in, his expression grim. You all know why you're here, he said, his voice sharp. We've received a complaint, and it's not just any complaint, it's from someone who can make our lives very difficult if this is not handled correctly. He turned to the supervisor. You were directly involved in this. I hope you realize the severity of the situation. The supervisor nodded, his face pale. Yes, sir, I understand. Good, the senior manager continued. The airline prides itself on customer service and inclusivity. We cannot afford to have incidents like this tarnish our reputation. You will all undergo further training on diversity, customer service, and conflict resolution. And as for the individuals directly involved in the decision to remove Barron from the flight, we will handle it internally. The staff exchanged nervous glances. They had no idea how deeply Melania's actions would affect them, but it was clear now that their mistake had far-reaching consequences. As the hours passed, Melania and Barron boarded their flight, and Melania could feel the weight of the situation slowly lifting. It wasn't just about getting Barron back on the plane anymore, it was about ensuring that no one else would have to experience what they had gone through. Once they were seated, Barron turned to her. Mom, do you think they'll really change? Melania looked out of the window for a moment, contemplating the question. She knew that change took time, but this was a start. I hope so, Barron. I really do. But even if they don't, we've made sure they'll think twice before treating someone unfairly again. Barron nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had learned something important that day, not just about standing up for what was right, but about how much power one voice could have when it was used for good. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Melania smiled. The battle wasn't over yet, but she had won this round. And she was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with meetings, phone calls, and updates. The airline had kept its word. The staff responsible for Barron's mistreatment had been reprimanded, and the company had begun implementing more rigorous training programs for its employees. The change, though slow, was happening. Melania felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, but she knew that this was only the beginning. She had fought for fairness, but now, her focus shifted to something even bigger. The airport staff had learned their lesson. But Melania was determined to make sure the world learned too. As she looked out over the horizon from her office, she knew that no matter where life took her, she would continue to fight for what was right, and help others do the same. Because when one person takes a stand, the ripple effect is felt by everyone. And that, she knew, was just the start of something much larger. Weeks passed, and the incident at the airport gradually faded from the public eye. However, for Melania, it remained a defining moment. The ripple effect from her actions continued to reverberate, not just within the airline, but across a broader network of influential people who had taken notice of her resolve. It wasn't long before she received a call from an unexpected source, a high-profile attorney who specialized in civil rights and corporate accountability. His name was Victor Carmichael, a figure known for his relentless pursuit of justice and his deep ties to corporate reform. "Mrs. Trump," he began, his voice smooth but with a hint of urgency. "I've been following the events surrounding your son's mistreatment at the airport, and I must say, I'm impressed. I've seen many cases like this, but none with the level of action you took. It's rare and frankly, refreshing." Melania remained silent for a moment. She wasn't the type to engage in long conversations about praise, but she could sense that this call wasn't about idle flattery. "I'm listening," she finally said. Victor continued, "I believe there's a larger issue here, one that you've inadvertently touched upon. Discrimination in public services, airlines, airports, even private businesses, has been a systemic problem for far too long. Your actions have exposed a small part of it, but I think we can make a much bigger impact." Melania's interest peaked. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm proposing a collaboration," Victor said. "You've got the influence, the network, and the platform. I've got the legal expertise and the resources. Together, we can not only hold corporations accountable for their discriminatory practices, but also help bring about legislative change that forces these institutions to operate with greater transparency and fairness. If we take this to the right people, we could change the way entire industries work." Melania felt a spark of excitement. She hadn't anticipated her personal fight would turn into something larger, but this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. "I'm in," she said without hesitation. "Let's make sure this doesn't end here." The following weeks were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and media outreach. Victor's team worked tirelessly to compile data, case studies, and legal precedents that showcased the widespread issue of discrimination in public services. Meanwhile, Melania used her connections to bring attention to the cause, speaking with high-profile influencers, lawmakers, and business leaders. News outlets picked up on the story, and soon the hashtag Stand for Fairness trended worldwide. What had started as a personal grievance had evolved into a global movement. Melania's name became synonymous with accountability, fairness, and justice. The airline that had been at the center of the controversy found itself under a microscope. Not only had they had to deal with the fallout from the airport incident, but now they were facing public scrutiny from the media, passengers, and even other corporations. Behind the scenes, the airline's executives were scrambling. They had underestimated the power of Melania's influence. It wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a signal that the world was changing. People were no longer willing to accept discriminatory practices, no matter how subtle. Meanwhile, Melania and Victor continued to press forward. They took their case to Capitol Hill, meeting with lawmakers and presenting their findings. Their goal was simple: to pass stronger laws requiring transparency in public services, particularly airlines and airports. These laws would require companies to publish regular reports on their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, and to face penalties if they were found to be discriminatory. The first breakthrough came when a bipartisan group of senators expressed their support. It wasn't long before other politicians joined the cause, and soon enough, the legislative proposal had enough backing to be considered seriously. Melania sat in the office of a senator who had become a key ally. He was reviewing the draft of the bill, nodding thoughtfully as he scanned the pages. "You know, Melania," he said, looking up from the document, "this is more than just a policy change. What you're proposing could redefine the relationship between consumers and corporations. It's about holding these companies accountable, forcing them to answer to the people they serve." Melania nodded. "It's not just about changing laws. It's about changing mindsets. If we can make fairness a standard, if we can make it clear that no one, no matter their status, will be treated as less than anyone else, then we will have succeeded." The senator smiled. "You're right, and I believe you're the one who can lead this charge." As the campaign grew, so did the resistance. Corporations with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo began pushing back, hiring lobbyists, and attempting to discredit the movement. They attacked Melania's credibility, tried to twist her words, and even questioned her motivations. But it didn't matter. Melania had faced worse before. This was nothing compared to the battles she'd fought in the past. Victor, too, had his fair share of run-ins with those who tried to discredit him. But the more the opposition fought back, the more it fueled their resolve. They knew they were on the right side of history. One day, as Melania sat in her office reviewing the latest developments, Barron entered the room. He had grown, not just physically but in his understanding of the world around him. "Mom, they're calling you a trailblazer," he said, a grin on his face. Melania looked up from her paperwork and smiled. I guess you could say that. But the real work is still ahead. We've come a long way, but this is just the beginning. Barron sat down across from her. I know. You've taught me something important. It's not just about winning, it's about making sure the fight is worth it. Melania reached over and placed a hand on his. You're right. And we'll make sure it's worth it, for everyone. As they continued to work together, planning their next steps, they both understood that their journey was far from over. But the road ahead was brighter now, paved with the possibility of real change. Months later, the legislative bill they had worked so tirelessly for passed through Congress, with overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle. It was a victory not just for Melania, but for all those who had been unjustly treated. But even more than that, it marked the beginning of a new era, one where fairness was no longer negotiable, and accountability was expected. As Melania stood before a crowd of supporters at a press conference, her eyes scanned the sea of faces, diverse, hopeful, and eager for change. We've made history today, she said, her voice steady and strong. But our work doesn't end here. This is just the start of a movement that will continue to grow. Because fairness, equality, and justice should never be up for debate. And with that, the future was clear. The fight for what was right would never stop. As Melania and Barron stood together, watching the crowd applaud, they knew their journey was far from over. The fight for fairness had sparked a movement, one that would continue to ripple across industries and society. The legislation they had worked so hard for was now a reality, a testament to their determination and the power of standing up for what's right. But for Melania, the true victory wasn't just in passing laws or winning battles, it was in knowing that she had inspired others to speak out, to fight for justice, and to never back down in the face of adversity. She turned to Barron, smiling. This is just the beginning. And as they walked off the stage, side by side, they knew that no matter where life took them, their legacy would be defined by their unwavering commitment to fairness, equality, and making the world a better place for all.